The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace as 10-year-old Prince George walked quietly toward the east wing. His small footsteps echoed softly against the ancient stones, a sound that had become familiar to the palace staff over the years. Today felt different, though, as if the very air carried a weight of anticipation that no one could quite explain. Prince George had always been an observant child, often noticed by the household staff for his gentle nature and curious eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. Unlike the bustling energy typical of children his age, George possessed a remarkable ability to move through the palace with a quiet dignity that reminded many of his great-grandmother, the late Queen Elizabeth II. The East Wing housed the quarters of the palace's security team, including the royal guards who stood watch over the royal family day and night. These men and women dedicated their lives to protecting the monarchy, often sacrificing time with their own families for the sacred duty they had sworn to uphold. Among them was Sergeant William Thompson, a man who had served the crown for over 15 years with unwavering loyalty and dedication. Sergeant Thompson had been struggling lately, though he tried his best to hide it from his colleagues and superiors. His wife Sarah had been battling a serious illness for months, and their young daughter Emma, only 8 years old, had been asking difficult questions about why her mother spent so much time in the hospital. The medical bills were mounting, and despite his steady income from his service to the crown, the financial burden was becoming overwhelming. The other guards had noticed Thompson's increasing distraction during his shifts. His usually sharp attention to detail had begun to waver, and the dark circles under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights spent worrying about his family's future. However, Thompson was a proud man who believed in carrying his burdens silently, never wanting to compromise his duty or burden others with his personal struggles. Prince George had observed these changes in Sergeant Thompson during his daily walks through the palace corridors. The young prince had a remarkable ability to notice when people around him were troubled, a sensitivity that often surprised the adults in his life. He had seen how Thompson's shoulders seemed heavier lately, how his usual warm greeting had become more subdued, and how he sometimes stared off into the distance with worry etched across his weathered face. On this particular morning, Prince George had made a decision that would soon touch the hearts of everyone in the palace. He had been thinking about Sergeant Thompson for days, trying to understand what might be causing such obvious distress in a man he had always admired for his strength and composure. The young prince had overheard hushed conversations among the staff about Thompson's family situation, and his kind heart had been moved to action. As Prince George approached the security office, he could see Sergeant Thompson through the window, sitting at his desk with his head in his hands. The sight strengthened the young prince's resolve. He had learned from his parents about the importance of compassion and using one's position to help others, lessons that had been reinforced through countless conversations about duty, service, and the responsibility that came with privilege. The morning shift was about to begin, and soon the corridors would be filled with the usual activity of palace life. Guards would take their positions, staff would begin their daily routines, and the royal family would go about their scheduled engagements. But something extraordinary was about to unfold, something that would demonstrate that true nobility comes not from titles or crowns, but from the simple act of one human being reaching out to help another in their time of need. Prince George paused for a moment outside the security office, gathering his courage for what he was about to do. At 10 years old, he was about to make a gesture that would not only change Sergeant Thompson's life, but would also remind everyone in the palace of the profound impact that kindness, no matter how quietly given, can have on the human spirit. Prince George knocked gently on the security office door, his small knuckles barely making a sound against the heavy wooden frame. Sergeant Thompson looked up, quickly straightening his posture and wiping his eyes before opening the door. The sight of the young prince standing there with a serious expression on his face was unexpected. But Thompson immediately stood at attention as protocol demanded. "Your Royal Highness," Thompson said, his voice carrying the respect and formality that years of service had ingrained in him. "How may I assist you this morning?" Prince George looked up at the tall guard, noting the redness around his eyes and the way his hands trembled slightly. The young prince had rehearsed what he wanted to say during his walk to the East Wing, but now, facing the man whose pain he had witnessed from afar, the words seemed more important than ever. "Sergeant Thompson," Prince George began, his voice soft but clear, I've noticed that you seem worried lately. I wanted to ask if there's anything I can do to help." The question caught Thompson completely off guard. In all his years of service, no member of the royal family had ever inquired about his personal welfare in such a direct and caring manner. The sincerity in the young prince's voice and the genuine concern in his eyes made Thompson's composure waver for a moment. "Your Highness, that's very kind of you to ask," Thompson replied, trying to maintain his professional demeanor, while struggling with the unexpected emotional impact of the prince's words. "I'm managing quite well, thank you." But Prince George could see through the polite response. He had learned to read people's expressions from watching his parents interact with others, and he could tell that Thompson was far from managing well. The young prince took a small step closer, his voice becoming even gentler. "My father taught me that sometimes people need help but are too proud to ask for it," Prince George said. "He also taught me that those who serve others with such dedication deserve to be served in return when they need it most." Thompson felt his throat tighten at the wisdom coming from someone so young. The prince's words echoed the very values Thompson tried to instill in his own daughter, and hearing them spoken with such sincerity by a child made them even more powerful. For a moment, the formal barrier between them seemed to dissolve, replaced by a simple human connection. "Your Highness," Thompson said, his voice barely above a whisper, "my wife has been very ill and my daughter—" He paused, unable to continue as emotion overwhelmed him. Prince George listened without interrupting, his young face showing a maturity beyond his years. When Thompson couldn't finish his sentence, the prince simply nodded with understanding, as if he had already known the weight of the burden the sergeant was carrying. "What's your daughter's name?" Prince George asked gently. "Emma," Thompson replied, a small smile crossing his face despite his distress. "She's 8 years old and she loves horses and fairy tales. She keeps asking when her mother will come home from the hospital." Prince George's eyes brightened at the mention of Emma's interests. He thought about his own love for horses and remembered the comfort that stories had brought him during difficult times in his young life. An idea began to form in his mind, one that would soon set in motion a series of events that would touch not just Thompson's family, but the entire palace community. "Sergeant Thompson," Prince George said with quiet determination, "I think I know how I can help. But first, I need you to promise me something." Thompson looked down at the young prince, puzzled but moved by the earnestness in his voice. "What would you like me to promise, Your Highness?" "Promise me that you'll accept help when it's offered with a good heart," Prince George said. "Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let others care for us." The simple wisdom of those words hit Thompson like a wave. Here was a 10-year-old child teaching him about courage and humility, showing him that accepting help wasn't a sign of weakness but an act of bravery. Thompson felt tears welling up in his eyes as he looked down at the future king, who stood before him not as royalty, but as one human being reaching out to another. That afternoon, Prince George made his way to his mother's private study, where Princess Catherine was reviewing correspondence for her upcoming charitable engagements. The princess looked up from her desk as her eldest son entered. Immediately, noticing the thoughtful expression on his face that usually indicated he had something important to discuss. "Mummy," Prince George began, settling into the chair across from her desk, "I need to tell you about Sergeant Thompson." Princess Catherine set down her pen and gave her son her full attention. She had always encouraged her children to share their observations and concerns, knowing that these conversations often revealed their developing sense of empathy and responsibility toward others. Prince George carefully explained what he had observed about Sergeant Thompson's distress and shared the details of their conversation that morning. He spoke about Thompson's sick wife, his young daughter Emma, and the weight of worry that seemed to be crushing the dedicated guard. As he talked, Princess Catherine could see the genuine compassion in her son's eyes and felt proud of his developing awareness of others' needs. "I want to help them," Prince George concluded, "but I'm not sure how. Emma likes horses and stories, and I thought maybe I could visit her, but I know that's not always possible because of security and protocol." Princess Catherine smiled at her son's thoughtfulness while considering the situation carefully. She had always believed in teaching her children about their responsibility to use their position to help others, and this seemed like a perfect opportunity to demonstrate those values in action. "You know," she said, "there might be something we can do. Let me speak with your father and see what arrangements we can make." That evening, Prince William joined the conversation when Prince George shared his concerns again over dinner. The future king listened intently as his son described Thompson's situation and his desire to help. Prince William had always respected Thompson's dedication and professionalism, and hearing about his personal struggles moved him deeply. "I think your instincts are exactly right," Prince William told his son. "Sergeant Thompson has given so much of himself in service to our family, and we should find a way to give back when he needs it most." The royal couple spent the evening discussing various ways they could help Thompson's family while respecting their dignity and privacy. They considered financial assistance, but knew that a proud man like Thompson might have difficulty accepting direct charity. They needed to find a way to help that would feel natural and appropriate, something that wouldn't embarrass Thompson or make him feel like he was receiving pity. Princess Catherine had an idea that seemed perfect. "What if we arranged for Emma to visit the palace stables?" she suggested. "George could show her the horses and we could present it as an educational visit. Children who are dealing with family stress often benefit from animal therapy, and it would give Emma something positive to focus on." Prince William nodded approvingly. "And while Emma is visiting, we could have our family physician discreetly consult with Thompson about resources for his wife's treatment. Dr. Richards has connections with some of the best specialists in London." Prince George's face lit up with excitement as the plan took shape. "Could I really show Emma the horses and maybe read her some stories from the library?" "I think that would be wonderful," Princess Catherine replied. "Sometimes the most powerful help we can give is simply showing people that they're not alone, that someone cares about what they're going through." The next morning, Prince William personally sought out Sergeant Thompson during his shift. The conversation was brief, but meaningful, with the prince expressing the family's gratitude for Thompson's years of loyal service and casually mentioning that they had heard about his daughter's love of horses. "We were wondering," Prince William said in a carefully casual tone, "if Emma might enjoy a private tour of the royal stables this weekend. Prince George has been learning so much about the horses lately, and he enjoys sharing what he's learned with other children." Thompson was speechless for a moment, overwhelmed by the kindness of the gesture. The invitation was presented in such a way that it felt like an honor rather than charity, something that respected his dignity while offering his daughter an experience that would bring joy during a difficult time. "Your Royal Highness," Thompson said, his voice thick with emotion, "Emma would be absolutely thrilled. She talks about horses constantly, and to meet Prince George, it would mean the world to her." As word of the planned visit spread quietly, among the palace staff something beautiful began to happen. The other guards and household workers, who had all noticed Thompson's struggles but hadn't known how to help, began to see that caring for each other was not just acceptable, but encouraged by the royal family themselves. Saturday morning arrived with crisp autumn air and golden sunlight streaming across the palace grounds. Prince George had barely slept the night before, excited about meeting Emma and showing her around the royal stables. He had spent hours the previous evening selecting books from the palace library that he thought she might enjoy, choosing stories about brave princesses and magical horses. Emma Thompson arrived at the palace gates holding her father's hand tightly, her eyes wide with wonder as they passed through the security checkpoints that Sergeant Thompson navigated daily for his work. She wore her best dress, a simple blue outfit that her mother had helped her choose before the latest hospital stay. Despite her mother's absence, Emma's excitement was infectious, and even the usually stoic palace guards smiled as she passed by. Prince George was waiting in the stable courtyard when Emma and her father arrived, flanked by his protection officer, but maintaining the relaxed demeanor his parents had encouraged for the visit. When Emma saw the young prince, she suddenly became shy, hiding slightly behind her father's leg while stealing glances at the boy she had only seen in newspaper photographs. "Hello, Emma," Prince George said with a warm smile, approaching slowly so as not to overwhelm her. "I'm George. Your dad has told me that you love horses just as much as I do." Emma nodded eagerly, her shyness beginning to fade as she saw the genuine friendliness in the prince's eyes. "I've never seen a real horse up close," she admitted quietly. "We live in a flat in London, so I only see them in books and on television." Prince George's face lit up with understanding. "Well, today you're going to meet some very special horses. Would you like to start with Balmoral, my favorite? She's very gentle and loves meeting new friends." As they walked toward the stables, Prince George began explaining about each horse they passed, sharing interesting facts about their breeds, their personalities, and their care. Emma listened with rapt attention, asking thoughtful questions that showed her genuine interest and intelligence. Sergeant Thompson walked behind them, marveling at how naturally his daughter and the future king interacted. When they reached Balmoral's stall, Prince George demonstrated how to approach the mare safely, showing Emma how to hold her hand flat when offering a treat and explaining how horses could sense people's emotions. Emma was initially nervous, but Prince George's patient guidance and Balmoral's gentle nature soon had her giggling with delight as the horse nuzzled her palm. "She likes me," Emma exclaimed, her face glowing with joy that temporarily pushed away the worry that had become her constant companion over recent months. "Animals are very good at recognizing kind hearts," Prince George replied seriously. "Balmoral can tell that you're a special person." They spent over an hour in the stables with Prince George introducing Emma to several horses and teaching her about their care. The young prince's knowledge was impressive, but what struck Sergeant Thompson most was his son's natural ability to make Emma feel comfortable and important, treating her questions with the same respect he might show to visiting dignitaries. After the stable tour, Prince George led Emma to a quiet corner of the palace gardens where a small table had been set up with tea and biscuits. He had brought along the books he had selected, and soon they were sitting together on a garden bench while he read aloud from a story about a young girl who discovered she could communicate with horses. Emma was completely captivated, not just by the story but by the fact that Prince George read with such expression and enthusiasm, changing his voice for different characters and pausing to ask her what she thought might happen next. For the first time in months, she seemed to completely forget about her mother's illness and her family's troubles. Sergeant Thompson watched from a respectful distance, feeling emotions he could barely contain. Here was the future King of England, spending his Saturday morning making his daughter laugh and feel special. The gesture was so far beyond anything he could have expected or imagined that he found himself struggling to process the magnitude of the kindness being shown to his family. As the afternoon continued, Prince George suggested they write a story together, one that Emma could take home and share with her mother in the hospital. They created a tale about a brave little girl who helped heal a sick horse with the power of her love and determination, a story that clearly reflected Emma's own situation while giving her a sense of agency and hope. "Your mummy will love this story," Prince George told Emma as they finished writing it down in a beautiful leather journal that appeared to be one of his own treasured possessions. "And when she gets better, maybe she can come visit the horses too." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of happiness rather than sadness. "Do you really think she'll get better?" she asked with the vulnerability that only children can express. Prince George looked at her with the wisdom that seemed far beyond his 10 years. "I think that when people know they're loved and cared for, it gives them strength to fight whatever battles they're facing. And you, Emma, are giving your mummy so much love every single day." As Emma's visit drew to a close, something unexpected happened that would forever change how Sergeant Thompson viewed his role at the palace. Prince George, who had been quietly observing his father's emotional state throughout the day, approached Thompson with the same serious expression he had worn during their first conversation in the security office. "Sergeant Thompson," the young prince said, "I have something important to ask you." Thompson immediately stood at attention, though the formality felt somehow different now after watching Prince George interact so naturally with his daughter. "Of course, Your Royal Highness. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about feeling like you need to carry your worries alone," Prince George began, his voice carrying a maturity that continued to amaze Thompson. "But watching you with Emma today, I can see how much love you have in your family, and I think that love shouldn't have to struggle alone." Prince George paused, seeming to gather his thoughts before continuing. "My parents have taught me that when people serve our family with such dedication, we become more than just employer and employee. We become a kind of family too, and families help each other." Thompson felt his throat constrict with emotion as he listened to the young prince's words. The sincerity and wisdom coming from someone so young was almost overwhelming. But there was something else in Prince George's manner that suggested he had more to say. "I know that accepting help can be difficult for proud people," Prince George continued, "but I want you to know that helping your family isn't charity for us. It's an honor. You've spent 15 years protecting people you care about, and now it's time to let people who care about you do the same. At that moment, Princess Catherine approached the group, having timed her arrival to coincide with Prince George's conversation. She carried with her a sealed envelope and wore the gentle smile that had comforted countless people during her years of royal service. "Sergeant Thompson," she said warmly, "William and I have been discussing your family's situation, and we wanted you to know that Dr. Richards, our family physician, has some colleagues who specialize in your wife's condition. We've arranged for a consultation, and all associated costs will be covered through the palace's staff welfare fund." Thompson's eyes widened in shock and gratitude. The staff welfare fund was something he had heard mentioned but never fully understood, and the idea that it could provide such substantial assistance was beyond his comprehension. Additionally, Princess Catherine continued, "We've been in touch with a private school near your home that has an excellent support program for children dealing with family health crises. They've offered Emma a scholarship that includes counseling services and enrichment activities. We thought the horse therapy program might particularly appeal to her after today's visit." Thompson looked from Princess Catherine to Prince George, then down at his daughter, who was still clutching the story they had written together. The magnitude of what was being offered was so far beyond anything he had dared to hope for that he struggled to find words. "Your Royal Highnesses," he began, his voice breaking with emotion, "I don't know how to thank you. This is more than I ever could have." Prince George stepped forward and placed his small hand on Thompson's arm. "You don't need to thank us," he said simply. "You just need to let us help, the way you've been helping us all these years." Emma, who had been listening quietly to the adult conversation, suddenly stepped forward and took Prince George's hand. "Prince George," she said with the directness that only children possess, "are you going to be my friend now?" Prince George's face broke into a genuine smile. "I would be honored to be your friend, Emma. And friends look out for each other, don't they?" Emma nodded solemnly, understanding in her 8-year-old way that something very important was happening. "Will you write me letters about the horses?" she asked hopefully. "I'll do better than that," Prince George replied. "I'll make sure you can come visit them again soon. And maybe when your mummy is feeling better, she can come too." As the Thompson family prepared to leave the palace that afternoon, something remarkable occurred. Word of Prince George's gesture had spread quietly among the palace staff, and as Thompson walked through the corridors toward the exit, he found himself receiving nods of respect and quiet words of support from colleagues who had previously maintained professional distance. The other guards, the household staff, even some of the senior administrators took a moment to acknowledge him not just as a fellow employee, but as a person facing a difficult challenge who deserved compassion and assistance. The atmosphere in the palace had shifted subtly but significantly, with Prince George's example showing everyone that caring for each other was not just acceptable, but essential. Captain Morrison, Thompson's direct superior and a man known for his strict adherence to protocol, stopped Thompson near the main entrance. "Thompson," he said quietly, "I want you to know that if you need any schedule adjustments for medical appointments or family time, just let me know. We'll make it work." The simple offer brought tears to Thompson's eyes, knowing that such flexibility could make an enormous difference in managing his family's crisis while maintaining his professional responsibilities. 2 weeks later, the impact of Prince George's intervention had created ripples throughout the entire palace community that no one could have predicted. Sergeant Thompson arrived for his morning shift to find his usual post assignment had been quietly adjusted to allow him more flexibility for hospital visits, and his colleagues had seamlessly reorganized their schedules to accommodate his family's needs. But the most profound change wasn't in the practical arrangements. It was in the atmosphere itself. The revelation that the royal family genuinely cared about their staff's personal welfare had transformed the workplace culture in ways both subtle and significant. Guards who had previously kept their struggles private began reaching out to each other for support, creating an informal network of mutual assistance that strengthened their overall effectiveness as a team. Prince George had continued to stay in touch with Emma, sending her handwritten letters about the horses and including small sketches he had drawn himself. These letters had become treasures that Emma carried with her to the hospital during her mother's treatments, sharing the stories with other children in the waiting room and spreading a little bit of the joy she had experienced. During her palace visit, Dr. Richards' specialist colleague had indeed provided exceptional care for Sarah Thompson, and while her recovery was still ongoing, the treatment plan was showing promising results. More importantly, the financial burden had been lifted from the family, allowing them to focus entirely on healing rather than worrying about mounting bills. On a crisp Thursday morning, something unprecedented happened that would become legendary among palace staff for years to come. Prince George was walking through the East Wing corridor when he noticed Sergeant Thompson standing at his post with tears streaming down his face, though he maintained his professional posture and vigilant attention to his duties. Prince George immediately approached, his young face filled with concern. "Sergeant Thompson, what's wrong? Is it your wife?" Thompson looked down at the prince, his face transforming from tears of anguish to tears of pure joy. "Your Royal Highness," he said, his voice trembling with emotion, "I just received a call from the hospital. Sarah's latest tests show that the treatment is working. The doctors are very optimistic about her recovery." Prince George's face lit up with genuine happiness, and without thinking about protocol or propriety, he reached out and hugged Sergeant Thompson around the waist. The gesture was so spontaneous and heartfelt that Thompson found himself embracing the young prince in return, both of them sharing a moment of pure human connection that transcended all boundaries of rank and formality. What happened next would be talked about in palace corridors for decades to come. Other guards who witnessed the emotional embrace began to approach, offering their own congratulations and expressions of relief for Thompson's good news. Then, in a gesture that shocked everyone present, Captain Morrison stepped forward and slowly, deliberately, removed his ceremonial hat as a sign of respect. One by one, every guard in the corridor followed Morrison's lead, removing their hats in a silent salute to their colleagues' perseverance and the royal family's compassion. The sight of these typically stoic professionals showing such open emotion and solidarity was unprecedented in the formal environment of the palace. Prince George looked around at the assembled guards, understanding instinctively that he was witnessing something extraordinary. These men and women who dedicated their lives to protecting his family were demonstrating that they also protected and cared for each other. The circle of compassion that had begun with his simple act of noticing Thompson's distress had expanded to encompass the entire community. "I think," Prince George said quietly to the gathered group, "that my great-grandmother would be very proud of all of you right now. She always said that the strength of the monarchy comes from the people who serve it, and the strength of those people comes from how they care for each other." The words carried a weight and wisdom that seemed impossible coming from a 10-year-old, but everyone present recognized their truth. Queen Elizabeth II had indeed valued loyalty and service above all else, but she had also understood that true loyalty flourished in an environment of mutual care and respect. Captain Morrison stepped forward, his usually gruff demeanor softened by emotion. "Your Royal Highness," he said formally, "I want you to know that your actions these past weeks have reminded all of us why we are honored to serve your family. You have shown us that true leadership begins with compassion." Thompson, still overwhelmed by the support surrounding him, managed to speak through his tears. "I came to work this morning wondering how I could possibly express my gratitude for everything your family has done for mine. But seeing this," he gestured to his colleagues still standing with their hats removed, "I realized that the greatest gift wasn't just helping my family. It was showing all of us that we're part of something larger than just our individual duties." Prince George nodded solemnly, understanding that the moment represented something significant not just for Thompson, but for everyone present. The future king was learning firsthand that leadership wasn't about commanding respect through authority, but earning it through genuine care for those who place their trust in you. As the impromptu gathering began to disperse and the guards returned to their posts, there was a palpable sense that something fundamental had shifted in the palace community. The formal hierarchies remained in place, but they now existed within a framework of mutual support and genuine concern for each other's welfare. 3 months later, the palace was buzzing with preparations for a special celebration that had grown organically from Prince George's initial act of kindness. What had started as one child's concern for a troubled guard had evolved into an annual tradition that would honor the palace staff and their families, recognizing that the strength of the monarchy truly did depend on the well-being of all who served it. Sarah Thompson had made a remarkable recovery, and the entire family was invited to the inaugural Palace Family Day, an event that Prince William and Princess Catherine had created to formalize their commitment to supporting their staff's personal lives. Emma Thompson, now a confident and happy child, had become something of a celebrity among the palace horses, visiting regularly and even helping with their care under the supervision of the royal grooms. Prince George had grown from the experience, as well, developing a deeper understanding of leadership that would serve him well in his future role as king. He had learned that true power lay not in commanding others, but in recognizing their humanity and responding to their needs with genuine compassion. The lessons he had absorbed during those weeks would influence his approach to royal duty for the rest of his life. As the celebration began, Prince George found himself standing with Sergeant Thompson, watching Emma lead other staff children on a tour of the stables. The young prince had kept his promise to maintain their friendship, and the regular letters between the palace and the Thompson home had evolved into a genuine bond that transcended their different circumstances. "Your Royal Highness," Thompson said quietly, "I've been thinking about something you said that first day we talked. You asked me to promise that I would accept help when it was offered with a good heart. I wanted you to know that promise changed my life, but not in the way I expected." Prince George looked up at the guard with curiosity, encouraging him to continue. "I thought accepting help would make me feel weak or diminished," Thompson continued. "But instead, it made me understand that being part of a community means both giving and receiving. It made me a better guard, a better father, and a better man." Thompson paused, watching his daughter laugh with delight as one of the horses nuzzled her cheek. "But more than that, it taught me that sometimes the most important service we can provide is allowing others to serve us. By accepting your family's help, I gave you the opportunity to live your values, to practice the kind of leadership that will make you a great king someday." Prince George considered these words carefully, recognizing a profound truth that many adults never fully grasped. The exchange of help and support wasn't a one-way transaction that diminished the recipient, but a mutual gift that strengthened both giver and receiver. As the afternoon celebration continued, with staff families enjoying the palace grounds and sharing stories of their own acts of mutual support, Prince George noticed something that filled him with quiet satisfaction. The culture of caring that had begun with his concern for one troubled guard had spread throughout the entire palace community. Guards checked on each other's families during difficult times. Household staff organized support networks for colleagues facing challenges, and administrators had implemented formal policies to ensure that personal crises wouldn't become professional disasters. Captain Morrison approached Prince George as the celebration reached its peak, his typically stern demeanor replaced by something approaching warmth. "Your Royal Highness," he said, "I wanted to tell you that since the incident with Sergeant Thompson, we've had a remarkable change in our team's effectiveness. When people know they're cared for, they perform better. They're more alert, more dedicated, and more trustworthy. Your act of kindness didn't just help one family, it made all of us better at protecting yours." Prince George smiled at this practical validation of what his heart had always known to be true. Kindness wasn't just morally right, it was strategically wise. People who felt valued and supported would naturally give their best efforts, creating a positive cycle that benefited everyone involved. As the sun began to set over the palace grounds, Emma Thompson ran up to Prince George, her face glowing with happiness and her hands dirty from helping to groom the horses. "Prince George," she said breathlessly, "Mummy says I can come visit every month now, and maybe someday I can learn to ride properly." "I think that's a wonderful idea," Prince George replied warmly. "And when you're old enough, maybe you can help me teach other children about the horses too." Emma's eyes widened with excitement at the prospect of such an important role. "Could I really help you? That would make me feel like a real princess." Prince George looked at this spirited, kind-hearted child who had taught him so much about resilience and joy in the face of adversity. "Emma," he said seriously, "you don't need a title to be royal. You just need to care about others and be brave enough to help when you see someone in need. You're already more of a princess than many people who were born with crowns." As the Palace Family Day drew to a close and the staff families began to head home, Prince George reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this moment. A simple observation about one person's distress had grown into a transformation that touched every aspect of palace life, creating a community bound together not just by duty and protocol, but by genuine care and mutual support. The young prince understood now that this was what true leadership looked like. It wasn't about grand gestures or public proclamations, but about noticing when someone needed help and having the courage to reach out with compassion. It was about creating an environment where everyone felt valued, supported, and empowered to be their best selves. Standing in the golden light of the setting sun, surrounded by the laughter of children and the quiet satisfaction of adults who knew they were part of something meaningful, Prince George felt a deep sense of fulfillment. His silent act of kindness had indeed moved the whole palace, but, more importantly, it had taught him that the greatest privilege of his position wasn't the power it would one day give him, but the opportunity it provided to serve others with love and compassion.